of a dialogue about it, just because I find that that's the way that people tend to learn best. So how did I get, so okay, wait, hang on, show of hands. How many people know who I am? Aha, about half the room. Excellent, okay. So for those of you who don't know who I am, I became aware of the basis of critical race theory about 2 years ago when social justice took over my knitting community. Yes, they took over knitting, they destroyed it. They went around attacking people based on, being excited about taking a trip to India or using the wrong words and all sort of stuff. And I'm watching this going, I just want to knit. Like, why can't I just knit? And no, that was no longer allowed. You had to be an advocate for Black Lives Matter, apparently, in order to be a knitter. Where do you guys think the pussy hats came from? The knitters. That was real. That was a concerted effort in the knitting world. So that's how I started to become aware of it. And then around the same time, all of my friends started to go crazy. Like I was a Democrat for 20 years. A lot of my friends, I worked in higher education for about 10 years. And so a lot of my friends came from the higher education world. And what that meant is that they were all kind of constantly in this progressive, like left-wing indoctrination centers. And one day out of nowhere, they were normal people when I met them. And then one day out of nowhere, they were like, Karlyn, shut up and listen to black people. And I was like, I wasn't aware that I wasn't listening to black people, but okay. And so I started kind of being like, I started slow playing, and I was like, wait, so okay, I'm a reasonable person. You want me to learn more about the experiences of black people? I can understand that. Why am I not allowed to ask questions though? And they were like, it is not their job to educate you about their experiences. And I was like, this just, like, I'm a psychologist, this doesn't seem like a productive way to create a greater level of understanding, right? To tell one group to shut up and listen, and the other group doesn't have to educate the first group. Okay. So I started kind of just really questioning this and really diving into what was actually going on. And that's how I stumbled upon critical race theory. And I'm probably one of the people that because I'm an organizational psychologist, I'm not going to come and like organize your closet or anything, but like I do work with businesses to help them create better work environments. And this theory was showing up in a lot of workplace trainings and diversity training. And so I just started watching these trainings to try to understand what exactly was going on. And what I found was, it's an incredibly dark ideology and mindset that has ingrained itself into absolutely every single aspect of our culture. It is everywhere. It is in the schools, starting when children are 4 years old, all the way up through college. It is in workplaces, it is in the government, it is in the military, it is in the church. It is absolutely every single place. And the people that are in this room, we're only starting to become aware of it and starting to fight back against it. But this has been going on for 40 years. They've been working on this for 40 years. And so we've got a little bit of ground to make up. So what is critical race theory? Because if you listen to the talking points from the Democrats right now, you would think that people like me just have no idea even what this thing is. It's just taught in law schools, isn't it? No. So here's my definition of critical race theory. Critical race theory is an ideology that started in academia in the 1970s. And the basic premise of it is that racism exists everywhere, in every person, in every interaction, in every institution. And the job of the critical race theorist is to suss out how, not if, how racism occurred in any given circumstance. So they are starting from the presupposition that racism exists, that it occurs in everything. So let me give you an example. Has anyone heard of Helen Pluckrose? Yeah, a few people have. Helen Pluckrose is a woman. She started an organization called Counterweight that's really trying to help people that are encountering this in their workplaces. They're doing really good work. I asked her one time, about a year ago, I said, Helen, why might it be racist for me to wear an orange shirt while walking down the street? It was an example I came up with off the top of my head, and I just wanted to throw it out there. How might a critical theorist look at me wearing an orange t-shirt and walking down the street and say that that's a racist act? Well, she thought about it for a second, and she said, well, Karlyn, prison uniforms are orange, and black men go to prison at a disproportionately higher rate than white people, and therefore wearing a shirt that is reminiscent of a prison uniform is racist. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about critical race theory. Here's a list of things that are racist. Milk, traffic signals, Gandhi, Buddha, racist. Trees, we're all racist. We're all among the trees right now. Trees are considered racist because people used to be lynched from trees, and so now trees are considered racist. Hiking, swimming, math is the big one that is considered racist. Yes, 2 + 2 might no longer equal 4. Who would have thunk it? But the thing of it is a lot of people lately have been framing critical race theory as racist against, people who look like me, who have pasty white Irish skin. But the reality is that it is truly racist against everyone. And I'll give you an example. There was a flyer that went up in the Smithsonian Museum of African American Studies last summer, which said that it is white supremacy to work hard, to be on time, to create a schedule. Now, the time telling one was really interesting to me because I was like, I've been to Machu Picchu and there are sundials there, which leads me to believe that they were telling time. And I'm pretty sure they weren't white. So I don't know how this is like a bastion of white supremacy, but if we reverse it, what are they really saying? They're saying that black people aren't capable of hard work, they're not capable of telling time, they're not capable of being on schedule, they're not capable of doing a good job. If you listen to the Democrats, they say that black people are not capable of getting an ID. That's incredibly racist. Let's look at how it impacts the Asian community. With Asian Americans, Asians are kind of the funniest community when it comes to critical race theory because sometimes they're oppressed and sometimes they're oppressors. And it really just depends on what is the most opportune thing at any given moment. So I'll give you an example. So Asians typically are at the bottom of the oppression hierarchy when it comes to critical race theory. And I'll tell you what, they really do not like Chinese Americans like Lily Tang Williams. Has anyone seen Lily talk? Because, oh my God, they really do not like Lily Tang Williams because Lily Tang Williams will tell you exactly what's going on. So sometimes they're at the bottom of the hierarchy, but when COVID first started, and we were pointing out that it came from China, well, that was racist. And there was a whole discussion about how we weren't even allowed to say where the virus came from because it was racist to say that. And then George Floyd died, and then Asian Americans went back down to the bottom of the oppression hierarchy. And then there was the Atlanta shootings, and in which they said, the shootings in Atlanta are proof of white supremacy against Asian Americans, and Asians were up again. Asians made a comeback. They were at the top of the oppression hierarchy again for about 15 minutes. And then the Derek Chauvin trial came to an end. Asians right down back to the bottom. So Asians are got to be the most confused of all different groups in this whole ideology because sometimes they're oppressed and sometimes they're not. But so it is incredibly racist against every single person. And the people that critical race theory targets more than anyone is just people who disagree with it. If you disagree with it, you will be a target of this ideology. I'll give you an example. Senator Tim Scott. If you don't know what Tim Scott looks like, he is very black. Very, very, very black. And he gave the response to Joe Biden's joint speech in front of Congress, and he said flat out, America is not a fundamentally racist country, because that's one of the things they believe, that America is founded on racism. And he came out and said that, and what did they do? They vilified him. They called him Uncle Tim on Twitter, hurled racial slurs at him, did everything they could to discredit this very black man who did not come from a wealthy family and then grew up to become a senator in the United States, and said that he's an oppressor. So it is against everyone who disagrees with it. And what people really need to understand is that critical race theory, I know it has race in the title, it's a little confusing, it has nothing to do with race. They are not trying to solve racism in this country. They are only making it worse. And let's just pause it for a second. What would happen if they solved racism in this country? They would have nothing else to do. They would have nothing else to complain about all day, every day. They're not trying to solve it, they're trying to perpetuate it. Why are they doing that? Because it gives them more power. Every single time they go on one of these attacks, they're doing it to try to get more political power. The Black Lives Matter riots, all summer last year we experienced riots, looting, all over the country. They were doing it to try to win an election. They promised people, if we just get Trump out of office, and you don't have to feel any which way about Trump, whatever you feel about Trump is fine, but they said to people, if we just get Trump out of office, then racism will be solved. Well, guess what? On Joe Biden's inauguration day, Antifa attacked the Democratic Party headquarters in Portland, Oregon, and completely destroyed it. So nothing was solved. It's just perpetual. Now, a lot of states have been introducing legislation to try to, quote unquote, ban critical race theory. And of course, this is going to bring up some questions about, like, is this limiting to free speech? Because I'm a free speech absolutist. I think that, like, the only speech that really needs to be protected is speech that's going to offend someone, quite frankly. And if we protect the most offensive, deplorable speech that we can possibly imagine, that means we are protecting all other types of speech, right? That's why the ACLU used to actually defend the KKK. Now the ACLU has a policy, they're not doing that anymore. They don't care about that anymore, it's transphobic. You think I'm joking, there was a memo. But we used to understand these principles. So how do these laws square with the idea of defending free speech in this country? Well, critical race theory, when it's taught in schools, when it's taught in organizations, it is antithetical to the idea of free speech, because you are not allowed to dissent. You are not allowed to ask any questions. I'll give you an example. There is a lawsuit out in Nevada right now. It is the first lawsuit against critical race theory that was ever filed. It was filed by a woman named Gabrielle Clark on behalf of her son, William. William Clark was a 17-year-old high school student who was taking this required course to graduate called Sociology of Change. Now, interesting thing about William's not white. He's biracial, but has very light skin, so they consider him to be white passing, right? And so William's teacher mandated that the students in this class, which again is a required course to graduate from this high school, they list out all their identities. So they had to list out their race, their gender, their sexual orientation. She was trying to out students and make them come out to their classmates as part of this assignment. Their gender identity, their religion, there are many other attributes. They had to list out all the different attributes of their identities and then characterize themselves as being an oppressor or being oppressed, okay? Required class in order to graduate from high school. Now, William Clark is a very smart young man because he listens to his mother and came home he was on Zoom classes. My God, like, thank God for Zoom classes for the last year, because it has exposed so much nonsense that's going on inside the schools. The teachers unions thought they were getting something over on us, but really they just showed us all their cards, didn't they? Yep. They really did. So Gabrielle Clark saw these slides that were showing up in her son's class. There was also a slide that said that you cannot be racist against white people because racism equals prejudice plus power, and because white people hold all the power in our society, can't be racist against white people. And she contacted the school and said, I don't want my son learning this stuff. No, absolutely not. Well, the school said, tough cookies, he's going to learn it anyway, and if he doesn't do the assignment, then he's not going to graduate. The school then tried to fail him in the class. They also suspended him for his trouble, and the lawsuit was filed, and thank God they actually got an injunction, so William ended up graduating. He graduated last month, I believe, which was awesome. But this lawsuit is still going on, and so this is showing up really overtly in the schools, where they are having kids being forced to graduate to admit that they are an oppressor, even if the kid's like, what did I even do? And we've seen this type of thing show up over and over and over again. I'll give you an example from Sandia National Laboratories, which is the company in charge of maintaining the nuclear arsenal, which, might be a kind of like important thing that we want to take care of. Whether or not you believe we should have them, that's another question. They flew 40 of their white male executives off to a 3-day retreat in New Mexico, where they forced them to confront their inherent racism and toxic masculinity and write letters of apology to their coworkers for being both male and racist, even if their actions and behaviors had not been racist at all. They were considered racist by virtue of them being white. How many people have read the book, or maybe not read the book, actually I hope no one has read this book. How many people have heard of the book White Fragility? Yeah, don't read that book. I descended into madness in the reading of that book. And one of the reasons is that Robin DiAngelo flat out says in that book that because she is a white lady, she has been racist since the womb. She has been socialized her entire life by white parents, and therefore she is an inherent racist, and she believes all white people are inherently racist. And the only thing that white people can do is self-flagellate themselves over and over and over and over and over again for their entire lives, to constantly be doing the work to be good anti-racist activists. And that is the only solution. So why might we want to ban this type of ideology in public schools? I have no idea. So the reason is that when you cannot dissent, you cannot think, right? You are not capable of teaching critical thought when you're just having these schools teaching people that all white people are racist, and there have always been racist, and there will always be racist. And they're not just doing it in social studies class, they're doing it in all different classes. They're doing it in English, they're doing it in drama, they're doing it in science classes, they're doing it in math classes. It is integrated across the curriculum. And when you cannot dissent, that is the key part of this whole thing. So let's look at I don't want to talk about the bill that just passed as part of the budget in New Hampshire, because I have many issues with what happened to this bill. But New Hampshire, before it was sabotaged by Chris Sununu, used to have a really good bill that was designed to address critical race theory in state agencies, state contractors, universities, and the school system. And what that bill said, essentially, was that you cannot teach this as objective fact. And the opponents of this bill were lying up and down. They were like, you're telling us we can't teach slavery. Like, I'm sorry, how many people in this room learned about slavery in school? Yeah, exactly. And we can have conversations about was it taught the right way? Like what is the curriculum we're teaching? We can have conversations about that. But what we shouldn't do is just deny that it's not being taught. What they're trying to make people believe is that we're trying to whitewash history, that we're trying to make it seem like America was just always this perfect place, and that's just not the case. America is supposed to strive to be a more perfect union. The founders of this country knew that we were not in a state of perfection yet, and a lot of them were actually really opposed to slavery, even the ones that owned slaves, and they wrote our founding documents specifically to help us be more perfect. Right? So it's not about whitewashing anything. But what the bills was trying to do was to say, listen, you can teach that maybe some people believe these crazy ideas as outlined in critical race theory, but you have to allow for opposing viewpoints. You cannot teach it as objective fact. And that was really what the bills were designed to do. It wasn't banning critical race theory, and that was, maybe I have some responsibility in this because I was the one saying they were banning critical race theory, but but they weren't really banning it in the true sense of the word. They were more so putting provisions in place to require teachers to teach it from an objective perspective instead of being activists. And you know what? So these bills, besides the one in New Hampshire, which again Chris Sununu completely sabotaged from start to finish, but there are other states that have passed bills like this, like Idaho, Iowa, Tennessee, Texas, I believe, has something or is working on something. Florida just banned it by executive decree. But a lot of these bills are being put in place, and you know what the teachers are doing? They're flat out coming out and saying, we don't care, we're going to teach it anyway, you aren't going to be in our classrooms, you don't know what we're teaching. And there is documented evidence that teachers are actually creating fake curriculum to send home to parents. They're being told by their school systems to create fake curriculum to give to parents who are asking questions about if critical race theory is being taught in the classroom. So they're doing one thing in classroom, they're doing another thing at home. So here's what we're going to try to do in the next legislative session in New Hampshire. And there are already a bunch of state legislators that are on board with this idea. There's going to be two things that are going to come up. Number one, we want to do educational transparency so that teachers are required to post online the course materials that they are teaching to these students to make it completely transparent. But number two, this is the thing that I'm really motivated about right now. Why can't we put a camera in every public school classroom to see exactly what the teachers are teaching, to give parents access to see exactly what the teachers are teaching?
Yeah.
And that might seem a little Orwellian, and listen, I've thought about that, but let's just be real for a second here. We are fighting a battle, we are fighting an uphill battle. Students are filmed in daycares, students are filmed on school buses, students are filmed in school hallways, students are filmed at basketball games, they're filmed at band recitals. Why aren't we filming the teachers and what they're teaching? This is the only way that this is really going to get the exposure that it needs. And to be honest, I really think it would accelerate the process to defunding the public schools entirely. If parents saw what it was being used for, it would accelerate the process of that. And I think that would be a great step forward in terms of actually regaining control of this thing. So I just talked for a couple minutes, and like I said, I do want this to be a discussion. I want to open it up, and I want to take some questions, and these guys are going to keep me on track in terms of time. So just flag me down when we start to run out of time, but we're going to take some questions. Let's start here first.
Should I get to the mic?
Just Albert.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll talk loud. This maybe doesn't have to do with CRT so much, but I can tell you I was a public school teacher for 33 years in both New York and New Hampshire, and I was told in New Hampshire to take down a quote by Ron Paul that said, if you would not steal from your neighbor, you can't ask the government to do it for you. However, all of my students would come to me and say how great FDR was, oh well, he started all these wonderful programs. And when I would speak against it, it was like I was told I was trying to brainwash the kids to see the conservative view, So this does go on in the classroom, in the public schools in New Hampshire.
Yeah, and just to emphasize that, there was actually an article that came out probably like 6 months ago. It was actually featuring teachers who were really pissed off that parents were red pilling their kids and counteracting what the teachers were teaching. The teachers were really upset about that. Yeah. Where am I going to go here?
If you want to come up to use the second mic, if you'd like to.
I think I can talk loud enough. I have two questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Before that, I did read White Fragility twice. So
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I feel you on how terrible it was. It was very enlightening, actually, as far as what's going on in the amount of deception that's in there, because I did it for a book review. But that's not really my question. My first question is, I have a tendency to go to as close to the source as possible, so I get the best feel for what the proponents are advocating. Is there a general book on CRT that I could read? I know it might be painful, so that I get the best understanding from them.
The thing that's going to get you closest to the original sources that is not going to drive you insane would actually be James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose's book, Cynical Theories, because what they do is they go through all of the academic literature behind the ideology, and they describe exactly what they're doing, because when you get to the original literature on this stuff, it's highly confusing, and that's by design, right? They're trying to confuse you. But what James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose do is they show you what the literature says, and then they put it in a broader context. So that might be the best place to see. And it's like a heavy book, but if you want to read the academic piece of it, that's where I would go.
Gotcha. And then my second question is, it seems to me, just from observation, that there's a lot of, just flat out say, there's a lot of white people that seem to have been beaten into submission. Their voice just doesn't go anywhere, no matter how much they object, no matter how intellectual their objection is. But what it seems that I've noticed, and in my own personal experience as well, being part Native American, is people of color, whether they're part or full, pushing back. Do you see that as a way, people of color, you need to, part or full, you need to lead the way in fighting against this, because white people are kind of already beating this?
I mean, my perspective is that I think that everyone needs to be speaking up, but I do think it is particularly powerful when we're talking about people of color speaking up, and we're starting to see more and more people do that. But it is a tough nut to crack, because, like I said, if you are speaking out against critical race theory, regardless of the color of your skin, they're going to attack you. Now, let me talk to you about a concept called multiracial whiteness. Multiracial whiteness was an article that was featured in the Washington Post in January, which is all about how if you are fighting back against these crazy ideas, I don't know, something's going, you guys are gonna have to fix that. There we go. There we go, okay. It's this idea that if you are fighting back against this ideology and you are not white, what you are doing is engaging in multiracial whiteness. So they're essentially calling you white just by virtue of you disagreeing with them. So that's what's going to happen when
white passing or for the Asians, white adjacent.
Yeah, white passing or white adjacent, exactly. We'll go back here and then we'll go here. Sorry.
I can only imagine the kind of attacks you've received on social media when you try to stand up for this. So
yeah.
For all of us here who actually enjoy civil discourse online, which is unfortunately more of a theory than reality for a lot of us. What are some of your go-to talking points that you use when people attack you about this?
First of all, you need to stay as far away from Twitter as humanly possible. And just know, if you're going into Twitter, you can do it, but it's not going to be pretty, okay? The very first thing I would say is, honestly, you just have to accept the fact that you're going to be called a racist. You will be called a racist, fine, and you just have to move on and know that you're not a racist and that you're not saying racist things. The very best thing you can do, though, I think if you're going to engage in online discourse, I think that, it kind of depends on, you want more civil dialogue. So if I was you, I would focus on pointing out the hypocrisies of critical race theory. I'm sorry, why don't you think that black people can go to the DMV and get a driver's license? That seems a little bit racist. Why do you have all these, why are you reinforcing stereotypes about people based on the color of their skin? And why aren't we looking towards just, my ideal version of what I think victory would look like is if we got back to a society that focused on individualism, individual achievement, that focused on providing everyone equal opportunity to succeed, right? And we did it in a colorblind way. And what I mean by colorblind is not that we don't see race. If I have a black person in front of me, I'm going to see that they're black, probably. It's not that I don't see it. But am I going to treat that person any differently based on the color of their skin? Well, I try not to. And I think that this ideology is training people to do that. So that's where I would focus. Now, if you want to be a little bit more of a shitposter and a troll, mock them relentlessly. Yes. They hate it. They hate it. Oh, they've been doing it. Oh, yeah, they've been doing it forever. So some people can be the trolls, and some people can be the more responsible adults. Ma'am.
Okay, so I come from a background of I'm drenched in Democrats, and some of the stuff I actually like, but it's no longer fitting well at all. As it's moved left, and then you might be a little crazy.
Right.
And extremely judgmental and rigid. But what my question is, do you have any resources you would recommend? I'm looking for an integration because I think there's some of what I'm hearing on the from leftists that to me makes a lot of sense. I think increased sensitivity. I feel like, okay, you're surrounded in a world with a lot of white people. You're really not getting another perspective, and we have had a really terrible history of slavery and discrimination.
Right.
So I'm looking for increased sensitivity, and but without kind of increased, I feel like there needs to be an integration. There's some really good ideas on the left, and yes, I think the education in the schools could definitely be a much fuller education about what it's like to be black in this,
right.
In this country, and how difficult that was, so that we can approach it with both knowledge and compassion, but not crazy and not judgment.
Right. So the question, if people can hear, is there something we can do that's like a middle ground that acknowledges that different people might have different experiences in life and that it's okay to learn about those experiences and be more sensitive to them? And absolutely, I think there's ways to do that. I mean, the point that I always try to emphasize is that not all diversity training is based in critical race theory. It's just not. My husband's sitting in the back. He's going to hate that I'm pointing him out. He's like, what? But, so obviously, we've both been working from home for the past year, and, probably 6-8 months ago, I come downstairs, and Victor's looking like he's concentrating very hard on his computer, and I'm like, oh my God, he's doing the diversity training. The day has come. I'm going to get all the dirt about what's going on. And, I asked him about it later, and he was like, Karlyn, it wasn't really that bad. It was just different people have different experiences and listening to different perspectives and all that thing, and I don't actually think it was that bad. And so there are companies that are doing diversity training that are not engaging in this. And the difference is that in those types of trainings, people are not being demonized based on their immutable characteristics. And so I think that those are perfectly fine. Now, that they are, but at least they're not detrimental, and so I'll take what I can get for the moment. Other questions? We'll go here, and then we'll go there.
Where should I find online them teaching people how to teach critical race theory?
There are actually, so there are actually teacher training programs that you can just sign up for to watch them, and I actually have. And and I don't have a good specific place to send you, but just Google around a little bit, and you can find some stuff that you can just sign up and watch an online webinar or going on YouTube, because a lot of these places, So on my YouTube channel, I actually do a thing every Friday afternoon, except for today, at 3 o'clock, where I watch a critical race theory training and drink and make fun of it. And they're like all available on YouTube. They put them right up. So just like spend some time on YouTube or just come to my channel. We can watch. We can suffer together through these trainings and at least support each other. But I was actually watching one where they were training teachers on how to integrate this into the classroom. And one of the teachers asked, "Well, what do I do with my biracial students? Like, how do I work with them?" And the answer from the critical race theorist was, well, you have to teach them not to identify with their white parent because the white parent is the oppressor and the non-white parent is the oppressed. And so really we should be teaching biracial students to only identify with their non-white parent. That sounds a little racist. I'm just saying. Next question I saw right over here.
Do you mind if I come up to?
Sure.
So, I went to, on my college campus, I went to SUNY Plattsburgh. I tried to go to every one of we have a Center for Pluralism, Diversity, and Inclusion on campus, which is part of the administration of the college. And I tried to go to all of the events to take responsibility for the issue of racism. And I'm super nervous after being habituated to just have my blood pressure just go through the roof by how, like, horrible and vicious and kind of like it's like ideological possession and pathological rationalization. So I've thought about this a lot. So I have a few questions. What do you have to say about the ideas of, minorities, people of color in this country having been hurt by racism and kind of like attacking back? And it seems like, what do you think of the ideas of like counter-racism? Do you want to take these questions one at a time? Or should I rattle them all off?
Well, how many do you have?
Maybe 5.
All right. What do I feel about like the legitimate grievances of minorities in this country? Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, I mean, if it might be a natural inclination to kind of, if you're really experiencing racism and are hurt and damaged by it, to like not like white people if they're making you a victim of some horrible.
I mean, well, I think this is actually one of the most insidious parts of critical race theory because I'm not one of those people that denies that racism exists in our country. I've spent the last week and a half being attacked by legitimate white supremacists. I know it exists. And they don't like me because I refuse to say critical race theory is anti-white and they really want me to. But no, I think they're like the thing that's actually really disheartening to me about this whole situation is that there are legitimate instances of racism in this country. There are legitimate problems. And we can't have those conversations because critical race theory overshadows everything. It's like they cried wolf too many times. When you're saying milk is racist, or trees are racist, or figure skating is racist, or any of these other stupid things, it completely delegitimizes actual problems, and we don't even get to a point where we can have a discussion about it because half of the audience is like, you just like, no, I don't believe this exists, or I'm just going to backlash against it. And so that's actually like, those are conversations I think should be had, and then we're just not in an environment where they can be had. I'm going to give you one more, and then we're going to do some other questions, okay?
Yeah. So, for me personally, my parents grew up in New York City and Queens, Long Island. The most fundamental lesson that my mother taught me was to judge people for nothing aside from the content of their character. And that has been a fundamental guiding ethos for the course of my entire life. And it seems to me that they're saying that that's impossible, right? Like, I can't exist. If I say that I've done nothing except at every opportunity dismantle racism at any time that it has presented itself to me, and that's not enough, and like, what more could I possibly do? I don't know, that's not really a question, that's a statement. But I'm relieved to be able to have this conversation in like a reasonable way and have an opportunity for that. But Yeah. So I think that also part of this conversation shouldn't be to neglect the like very legitimate things about privilege, right? Like if I walk into a room and people aren't that happy to see me, I don't have to ask myself the question of, is it because I'm black, right? And so, and that is legitimate, you know?
There's not any research to say it's legitimate, but.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't have to ask the question. I don't have to wonder, like, do these people not like black people?
But no one has to wonder that.
Okay, well, all right.
I mean, okay, here's the thing. And okay, so again, like I want to acknowledge, like, I think it's perfectly acceptable to think about the different experiences that people have in life, and again, I support those types of conversations. The idea of privilege, it comes actually from an essay called "Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack" by Peggy McIntosh, which was written in 1989, and essentially this essay is just a list of statements from a white lady about how she perceived the world. There are no works cited in it. There's none. There's no citations. And listen, I'm open to being proven wrong here. I have yet to actually witness any research that tells me that this is a real and measurable and verifiable thing. All I have is an essay from a white lady who, I mean, let's be honest, is like kind of a little racist. Like all of these like white liberal academics are some of the most racist people that you will ever talk to. They really are. And even if you look in White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo based the book White Fragility on her dissertation. And I know that because of the first half of the book, lots of citations, lots of work cited. The second half of the book, almost no citations. It's literally just based on Robin DiAngelo writing whatever was coming out of her head at any given moment. And it's just like it's actually really disturbing when you look at the lack of citations. So again, I'm not denying that those types of things happen and that we should be considerate of those things, but the research backing it is just not there. Okay, well, lots of questions. All right, we're gonna go here and then here and then here.
Is that me?
Yes.
Okay.
Then we're gonna go to the back after that, I promise.
CRT is a set of different ideologies being propagated in the school systems all over the nation, right?
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes.
Now, how much of that ideology, even though it's based on racism, really has Marxist roots?
Aha, Marxism. Yeah, so if you follow the line back, critical race theory really does come out of the Frankfurt School, which is a Marxist ideology, and I'll give you an example of how it really shows up. In the schools, they're teaching the idea of equality versus equity, right? Equity is a word that has just come into the context about race probably in the last 5 years or so. It's something that they invented. They really like inventing new terms and inventing new definitions. So equality is something that I think everyone in this room can get behind, which is the idea that every single person should have equal access to opportunities in this country, and then how hard you work, how you show up, what you contribute, that leads to you getting the opportunities or not getting the opportunities. Now we can have discussions about disparities, and I'm not going to say that, again, we don't have a perfect system, but what equity teaches and what they really want is equality of outcome. Part of this entire conversation is entirely dependent on the fact that there are racial disparities, and they want to just reduce those racial disparities down to zero. Well, you can't do that unless you're focusing on equality of outcome. Equality of outcome is a fundamentally Marxist idea, and they 100% are teaching it in schools. I've seen it. I've seen video of the classes, so that there's roots in that as well. Yeah. All right, sir.
I completely appreciate why you do not want to enable white supremacists.
Yes.
But I think the way that you're forming the question is going to just keep you going around in a circle. So critical race theory is racist. But people aren't racist in some general sense of the term. It's like the Tom Lehrer song, the Protestants hate the Catholics hate the Protestants, the Jews hate the Muslims, and everybody hates the Jews. And we get even more finer grained than that of, Cubans look down on Puerto Ricans, Dominicans and Haitians live on the same island, and they both look down at each other. So within critical race theory, we have a panoply of different ways that racism is expressed, and it's those different ways that it's expressed, which is why we can say it's racist. So when you deal with people who are dealing with one specific manifestation of it, it has to be okay for them to say, I'm getting screwed because of my identity.
And okay, so this is a question about how I'm framing the conversation in terms of refusing to say critical race theory is anti-white, and I appreciate that perspective. Well, no, and I think that it's a balancing act to be had, right? Because, I mean, to be honest, there are anti-white components, and I don't think that we should be denying those components. However, why are we playing by the rules that they are setting is my bigger issue with this entire thing. Because if the goal is a colorblind society that focuses on the individual, then we can't be fighting the argument in terms of one form of racism is more important than other forms of racism. I just like the whole reason that I got into fighting this to begin with is because to me critical race theory seems like you're trying to end racism by creating more racism, and I don't think that that's good. And so I don't think that we can, create a new form of racism in order to fight. I just don't think it works.
I agree with you. Just one more thing.
Sure.
This isn't the first time we've been played like this. Why is the left historically for civil rights? Because after the Russian Revolution, which happened in the last place that Marxist theory said it should happen, Stalin needed to direct all of the other communist parties from trying to figure out what's going on in the Soviet Union, and what he said was, you guys all have colonies. America, you have black people. You have big cultural issues here. I'm going to write this book, The National Question, which tells you how you should go out and get tied up in knots rather than focusing on why Marxism isn't working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So it's not, and this is why it's scary when some people on the left say things that sound nice, but given all we know about unintended consequences and the history of what's happened in the past, it also comes with a lot of statist baggage.
Yeah. So we're gonna go to this young man, and then Bill, I got you next, buddy. I got you. Desiree, I got you too. All right, and we'll come over here.
What do you think about the idea that critical race theory and the woke stuff is being pushed to distract from the more nefarious things corporations
Oh, so the question is, what do I think about critical race theory and the woke stuff being pushed to distract us from the real problem?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, the whole premise of this is they're trying to get us to fight. Okay, so fun fact. The New York Times used to not write that many articles about racism. They really didn't. They wrote maybe like a handful in a year. Do you know when the New York Times really started writing a lot of articles about racism? Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street. Because what happened during Occupy Wall Street, and that movement had its faults, let's just be honest, had its faults, but it was one of the major times when a populist movement started to come together to fight back against the establishment. And the establishment's like, we don't want that to happen again. Like, we don't want them to actually figure this stuff out and figure out that they can work together. And so when we look at the number of articles that were written about racism, when Occupy Wall Street ended, that number of articles about racism doubled the very next year, and then it doubled the year after that, and then it doubled again the year after that, and it was like a straight shot up where the media was just pumping out all of these articles about racism in this country and how it was such a bad country, to the point now where I think it's like 6 times the number of articles written today about racism than were when Occupy Wall Street ended. So this is a concerted effort. This is not something that happened by accident. This is not about creating fairness or justice. This is an effort to keep us all fighting each other, because if we're fighting each other, then we're not fighting them. Yeah. So we're gonna go to Bill and then Desiree. Gotta shout, Bill.
Yeah. So going back to the biracial kid in school, so who do you teach people to identify with? What do you think about the implicit admission that they want people identifying as victims? If you're saying, well, yeah, I don't think it's good for kids to identify as oppressors or victims. It's probably not healthy. But the idea they want to create more people feeling oppressed.
Yeah. So this is a really good question, and this is why I am absolutely committed to saying that critical race theory is racist against everyone, because I am not okay with teaching young black children that they will never be anything in life because the world is working against them, and the only thing that can lift them up is a white savior. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with teaching, So So there's a positive psychology researcher, her name is Michelle Gielan, and she basically found that to achieve like success in life, you need to have 3 components in your mindset. You need to be able to believe that success is possible. You need to be able to approach the issue of stress as an opportunity rather than as something that's going to be debilitating. And you need to be inclined to help the people around you. If you do these 3 things, see that success is possible, view stress as an opportunity rather than a challenge, and help people around you, you will be more successful in life. What they are teaching children, like little kids, is that none of these things matter. The only thing that matters is the color of your skin. This is child abuse, so far as I'm concerned. It's child abuse for absolutely everyone. But I think that one of the most overlooked things is the impact on non-white children who are being taught this ideology from the time they're 4 years old. So that's what I think about that. Desiree?
It's not a question, but I wanted to comment.
Yeah, of course, girl.
So a couple of things. I wanted to kind of push back on what you, I don't know your name, were saying, but when you walk in a room, you might think, what are people thinking because of the color of your skin? So I want to mention that racism is just a form of bigotry, and I think everybody experiences that at some point in their life. I also think that racism doesn't just occur from white to black, it occurs from black to white and from Asian, all of that. And something about these discussions that totally leaves out how different people can experience that. And they might not even be black and white, it might be something else. So that's the first thing. I just don't think that that is true, that is something that is put into people's minds. I can't speak for anybody but myself, but I'm an immigrant, so I'm from Jamaica. I wasn't raised here. I don't have a lot of the mental education in my head that a lot of black Americans might have. I could adopt that. I have cousins that have adopted that, or my friends, but I just decided not to because I wasn't really raised that way. So I just wanted to say that it's not just a thing, like there's a particular form of it in this country, but I think everybody has had that experience of like, I'm being disliked for something that I can't change about myself. Maybe not 100%, but a lot of people, it's not just a black and white thing. And then I also just wanted to say that my advice for getting through this is, 1, to talk to people in person. I think that when you're online, it's really easy to not connect, and I think it's not good. I've actually kind of been backing off of being online myself because of that. And if you have children or just for yourself, I think it's really useful to teach them to just, I know it can be hard, but to judge people as individuals and individual expressions. If you believe in a God, of a divine being, if you want. And then there was one more thing. I can't remember, but it was along those lines. And I think that that's one way to go about dealing with these issues. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. Then I have over here.
So I have 2 questions, but the first one is, someone is recording, right? Yeah. Okay. So a friend of mine works at this huge corporation, and this friend was part of a assessment after an interview for someone, and during that the assessment, this friend said, it's a good candidate, blah, blah, blah. Everyone was, yeah, it's a good candidate. And then this person's boss said, well, there's this one thing, that this candidate is white and male. And this friend of mine almost can hide the, but still, during that same conversation, it was resolved. It seemed to have been resolved because someone else in the meeting said, well, consider also that we have you guys can kind of forget about this because we just hired someone who's going to balance it.
Yeah, so a lot of organizations are doing that, especially like, I think it's getting a little bit better now, but I'll tell you, like right after George Floyd died, I talked to so many CEOs who are like, we're not hiring white men right now. I mean, truly, like it's a problem, and I think that I do think it is actually getting better though. And we're not all the way there yet, but I think it's starting to go back the other way.
Just to complete the question, it sounded like this is a quota, right? Because
I wouldn't call it a quota. I don't think it's, I understand why you're using that word, but it's not like, in most places it's not like a formalized thing. Some places are saying, you know, we need this percentage of like non-white people, but not most places.
You cannot say that. You cannot say we need that percentage. You can aim. You can say we have an aim for that, but you cannot say this person is not being hired because this and that, right? Because that would be
No, I mean you can't say it outright, but they can always come up with a reason not to hire someone. But listen, like in this conversation, and I just want to make sure I